Hi, it's Ashley from Sweet Dreams Bake Shop, and today we're going to be making a vegetable garden cake. One of my favorite cakes to make are those that involve food, and making fondant look like other food, which is kind of ironic because fondant is food. Anyway, today I am using my chocolate cake recipe that I always use from Glorious Treats. I will put the recipe down in the description box below, and I am also using my Italian meringue buttercream mixed with Oreo crumbs. I will throw up that link in the right-hand corner of me making the Italian meringue buttercream. I have plenty of other videos of me crumb coating and leveling my cakes in real time, so if you want to go check one of those out, you definitely can. But basically all I did was I took a rectangular cake and then I crumb coated it with one layer of buttercream this time. Whenever I am working with fondant, I generally like to make sure that my cakes have set up in the fridge for at least 30 minutes or so. The longer the better, especially with Italian meringue buttercream because it doesn't harden as quickly as American buttercream does. As you just saw there, I rolled up my fondant really nice and thin using a lot of cornstarch on the bottom so that things don't stick, and I also really just fearlessly picked up my fondant and put it on top of the cake. I'm not into using the whole rolling pin technique because I don't have a large enough rolling pin, so I generally just use my arms. If you hesitate and take too much time, then your fondant is going to start to rip, so you want to make sure that you really adhere all of that fondant directly to your cake as soon as possible. Also, another tip, if you have placed your cake in the fridge for a really long time and you're noticing that things aren't sticking, then you just need to apply a little bit of shortening to your buttercream and then your fondant will have no issue sticking at all. Smooth the edges with a fondant smoother, and if you've kept your cake in the fridge for a sufficient amount of time, you should be able to do this quite firmly. Don't worry about being too perfect because you're basically going to be using details to cover every part of the cake that you see right now. Steam your cake with a clothing steamer so that it's going to be really easy to adhere these wooden panels that we're going to put on. If you want to check out another wooden panel technique that I've done in past, then you can go ahead and click that right-hand corner. The techniques are very similar, but in this particular video, I'm not going to be adding any additional color. I'm keeping things a nice, crisp white. Use whatever cake tools you would like to create this pattern on top of your fondant. Notice how I have a large piece of fondant and then afterwards I kind of break it up into pieces using that pastry cutter. I highly recommend getting a pastry cutter if you don't have one already, especially if you're making a lot of cakes because it really helps you make even pieces. This is really great too for borders or for when you're creating bows. I want to emphasize again how much time I am saving by just steaming my cake instead of having to individually paint with water. I want to give my little vegetable garden box a little bit of a rustic look, so I'm going through and I'm cutting off little pieces. I want to make sure that all of the paneling is super secure, so what I'm doing is I'm pressing it in with this cake tool to maintain that texture instead of using my hand. For the soil, I'm going to be using some Oreos, which I'm going to finely crush up. To make sure everything adheres nicely to the top, I'm going to put down some Oreo buttercream here and make sure that I cover every inch. Now, some of you might be wondering why I didn't just do the paneling on the sides of my cake and then leave the top just having the buttercream exposed. The reason I did that is because the fondant does not adhere as well to the buttercream and I didn't want that paneling falling off. Fondant adheres much better to fondant. Time for those vegetable details. Now you can really use whatever vegetables you want. I wanted to actually make my vegetable garden so it was more like a vegetable box. So you'll notice I went a little bit bigger with my vegetables. What I'm doing here is I'm dyeing my white fondant like I've mentioned in videos before. It is much more cost effective to buy a large white tub of fondant and then dye it however I see fit instead of buying individualized colors. You'll notice that I'm adding a lot of cornstarch to this, and this is just because that food coloring causes everything to be really sticky. Now, normally if I was covering a whole cake with this orange color, then I would just let that fondant sit out and dry out just a little bit before using it. But because I'm just using it for something really small, I'm going right ahead and just adding that cornstarch in. Just remember that adding cornstarch can cause cracking, especially when you're using it with large surfaces where you're going to be rolling it out and then melting it again. So because I'm only doing this small little portion, it's going to be okay and there's not going to be any cracking that's going to happen. I'm indenting the top of this carrot because I'm going to be adding a stem to it later. Now I'm going to be working on the lettuce head, and what I'm going to be doing is taking all of those pre-made Rice Krispie squares, I think I'm using 3 here, and then I'm molding it into a little ball. I want this lettuce head to look realistic, so I took some green fondant and mixed it a little bit with some white fondant, and I wasn't too picky about making sure that everything was mixed in perfectly, because if you look at a head of lettuce, the green is not totally green all the way through. To make the lettuce leaves, you just take a little small chunk of fondant and then you kind of pinch it down the center, and then using a balling tool and a foam mat, you kind of just ball out the edges so that it looks really nice and thin. Then using a paintbrush and water, you're going to adhere those leaves to that little Rice Krispie ball we created and keep overlapping until you like the look. For our little cherry tomatoes, I just rolled some white pieces of fondant into a little ball, and now I'm kind of indenting that center and using a little cake tool to create those lines. I'm going to be airbrushing everything to give it a realistic look, but if you don't have an airbrush, then when you make all of these little vegetables, you need to make sure that they're the right color right off the bat. When airbrushing all of the leaves, I like to kind of make sure that I put the airbrush just at the tips of the leaves and just a really light airbrushing in the center. For this lettuce head here, I'm making sure that again, I'm aiming it towards the tips of the leaves where generally the leaves would be darker. For the carrots, I'm making sure to take that orange airbrush and putting it right directly on all of those little indents that we made earlier. A little tip with airbrushing, make sure that you make your fondant colors lighter so that when you put that airbrush on, it really pops. I'm using orange airbrushing on the cherry tomatoes as well because when I put that red over top, it's really going to give it that natural color because cherry tomatoes aren't fully red through and through. Putting on those little carrot stems and finishing up these little cherry tomatoes by airbrushing them red and making sure that I'm leaving some of that orange peeking through still. When placing those vegetables down, you don't need to do anything very special because underneath you've got all that buttercream. So if you just press down gently, it should adhere to most of that buttercream under there. I'm adding tiny leaves to the cherry tomatoes, which you totally don't have to do. I just wanted a little bit more brightness right there. I often don't use cookie cutters or fondant cutters for this process, and I generally just use my fingers. Then I'm going back and airbrushing just a little bit more green on the details, and there you have it. There is your vegetable garden cake. Thanks so much for watching, guys. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe so you can be part of this Sweetie fam. Right now, I'm still uploading daily, so make sure you hit that notification bell so you know when I upload. Also, be sure to comment, request, or ask a question. I love hearing from you guys.